Okay, so anyway, yeah, let's go down the
No,
aisle.
that made the news. That was big news. I didn't realize.
Yeah, this is a Van
I
Hut
stop
trailer.
once in a
I
while.
had previous shipped back from Belgium. Now, why would I spend all that money to get these trailers back? Because they only made these in 1943. 1943, the U.S. government was trying to save all kinds of metal, like for the Manhattan Project in New Mexico for the atomic bomb. And 1943 was the only year the Americans made steel pennies. Did you know that? So these trailers are made 80% out of wood. If you were a citizen in 1943 in America and wanted to register your car, this was the license plate. See that strip? This one just happens to say New York. So you were told to take that strip, put it over the old 1942 date, and you wouldn't have to waste all the metal. If you pulled into a gas station in 1943, no more steel oil cans. You'd have to take a mason jar like this, pump the oil out of a 55-gallon drum into the bottle, and then put it in the vehicle. See that? They took all kinds of shortcuts, because metal was a real big thing in World War II.
I think we still have a roll of those steel pennies.
Oh, yeah?
Wow. Did you know about that? Steel pennies? I didn't.
Yeah, I have still pennies.
Do you?
Although it's not supposed to be a ball.
So let's move it up. This is the M3 half track. The only difference from the M3 and the M2, this one has a back door. Yeah? And this is fully equipped, just the way it would have been coming off the landing craft in Omaha or Utah Beach. These are M36 backpacks. That's a 1919 A4 3006 anti-aircraft gun. It's got 3 of those, and that's a 75 millimeter recoilless rifle. Hey, it's all ready to go. Well, if they, if they have a mount like that, they're really interesting. Okay, move it up. This is the M38A1, made in 1950 specifically just to haul around the 106 millimeter cannon. I used to drive this around town about 10, 12 years ago. I used to get some good looks.
Stan says.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's move it up. This is the oldest Jeep I have, 1940. In fact, this is an experimental Jeep. They only made 3,500 of them. See, it looks like a piece of junk. Anytime I want, I could call other collectors around the country and get $30,000 for that. They only made 3,500 of them. They didn't even have a starter motor, so you had to crank it. So anyway, in 1940, GPW Ford and MD Willys were in competition with each other to prove to the U.S. government that these little four-wheel drive vehicles could haul around 30 caliber and 50 caliber machine guns and shoot them off the vehicle. So they proved that both of these could work like that at the Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland in November 17th, 1941. And then both of them got contracts to make 200,000 Jeeps during World War II, which both companies made over 200,000 each. Over here is the first Mutt. We named them the Mutt because in Vietnam it's always muddy. And I have about 8 of these. The last 2 I got from Fort Carson about 20-something years ago at the auction were cut in half for scrap metal. They wouldn't sell them anymore to the public because they turn over real easy. See, they have A-frames all the way around, and if you put a lot of weight on the top, they flip over. In fact, the last 5 years, the Kaiser Company in Wisconsin made these. They came with roll bars. I heard in California, a lot of kids were getting hurt. They were flipping these over and getting killed, and the families were suing the government. So that's why they'd sell them for scrap metal. So the last 2 I got, I welded back together. They're made out of aluminum. They were never made for civilian use. Now let me put the other lights on for you. Yeah, these are the most popular World War II weapons right here on the floor.
No, he said about welding back again. With like the Mack trucks and plate ladders and stuff.
Yeah, World War II weapons, that's it, that's a live 81 millimeter mortar. See, they would have used in the 113 Armored Personnel Carrier. That's a live 60 millimeter mortar, those are practice rockets on the bottom. This is the Eddystone, they used that World War I and the beginning of World War II. That's the M1 carbine, 30 caliber. This is the M1 Grant. They made these in 1933 and they stopped making these, the last one in 1955. This is the Springfield 3006, and these are the most popular weapons they used in World War II. Anybody have any questions? The mortars?
Grenade mortars.
Oh, yeah, well, those are World War II. Those were fired off the M1 Grant with a blank, and those are rockets that would propel it 300 to 400 yards. And then when it hits the ground, they're hoping that piece of wood would come out and the handle would open and it would blow up. Pretty antiquish. Something the Flintstones would have. Yeah. Okay, over here, this is a tug, 1943, and take a look at the picture. Look what it looked like when I got it. They pulled this out of the lake in New Mexico. I don't buy them like that anymore. That's so much work. Yeah. So anyway, the job of the tug was to hook up these bomb trailers. In back of the tug, they'd hook up 8 to 12 of these, and they'd pull these 500-pound bombs out to the B-24s, the B-25, and the B-17 bombers and load them. See that? It was nicknamed the tug. Over here, this is a Mighty Mite. See that? This is made out of aluminum. And they used to airborne these to the Marines in Vietnam. See, they only made 3,900 of them. And what makes this special, each wheel has its own differential and drive shaft. So if it went over a landmine and one wheel came off, it was made to drive around in 3 wheels. The original parachute is in this canister, and it was hooked up to the shackles on the bumpers, and it was airlifted out of the C-130 airplanes in Vietnam for the Marines. They only weigh 1,800 pounds. See, that's a picture of the back of my house. I don't see any gangbangers running around. Yeah, they got caught on 11 cameras, real smart.
And they were broadcast everywhere on the news.
Yeah, yeah, it's really embarrassing saying Dragon Man got robbed, but they did it so sneaky, you know. No matter who you are, you can't, once they take you away from the property, they can do whatever they,
But
luckily,
you had support from the community.
everybody likes me. The ones that don't like me are jealous. But what they could have done, they could have broke into my house garage, and I have 2 big front end loaders, and they could have just took the whole wall down. You know. Thank God they didn't
Crazy.
think of that.
Yeah, right.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Trying to get into that and run that, I highly doubt they wouldn't have the brains.
You're right. Hey, you come around the turn here, this is my 113 Armored Personnel Carrier. I got this from the Vickers Police Department about 20-something years ago, without a motor in it, for scrap metal. And I was real lucky to get the machine gun nest on the top, because even when the government did auction these off, they would never give the public the machine gun nest, because back then, they had the militias and all that. So here's a picture of me and my son putting a 400 cubic inch Detroit diesel motor in it. See, and now it's fully operational. That's called a turntable that holds the 81 millimeter mortar that I just showed you. And if you read the mortar manual on page 2, it says, make sure the hatch doors are open before firing.
Oh, that's a mortar?
You remember these in Vietnam?
No, never seen, I did see them occasionally.
Yeah, they made these in 1965, and the 4,000 solar